Now we're going to introduce other members of the panel to talk about youth and politics in Africa. First, I'd like to call Gbenga Sesan, a Nigerian youth leader who's very decorated. He works with young people in the tech industry in Nigeria. And next, I'd like to call Mary Harper, BBC Africa editor, who has a specialism in Somalia. Thank you very much for joining us. So we've had the benefit of the minister's insights and his experience. So now I'm going to talk to Gbenga and Mary to kind of share your views about what you think youth can do to change politics in Africa.
Thank you. First of all, maybe I'm sure we'll get to the question and answer session, but I honestly was looking forward to the Deputy Prime Minister talking more about the practical steps you're taking in Zimbabwe. Because one of the things that I'm sure is a problem for young people in Africa is we listen to a lot of theory. And unfortunately, because we listen to theory, when we kind of get there, we forget how we get there, and then we tell others the theory. Three things. One is in terms of the word youth. I mean, when you introduced me and you said a youth leader from Nigeria, I kind of should. I mean, I was sitting beside my wife there. I'm not sure that you should call, I understand why you're calling me youth, but I think this is one of the fundamental problems we have. Talking about youth leadership on the continent, I think that we defer development. Okay, African Youth Charter says 35 is the age limit for young people. I think there's a problem there where we give people an opportunity to give an excuse to delay maturity and providing action. Unfortunately, there's a country called Nigeria, which I come from, where the youth leader of a political party is 60. Now, how on earth do you tell someone, feel free, play all you want, give all the excuses, when you turn 60, we'll judge you? I think we need to answer that question of what exactly are we talking about when we say youth? There's a reason why the world agreed on 24. Because by that age, you need to begin to take responsibility, otherwise we're pushing everything off. Second point I wanted to quickly make is in terms of our individual contribution. I think it's not, Father Kuka said something earlier about, how, you also need to contribute as a person. And I'm thinking to myself that in this room today, right now, we've got an elite group of people who have been exposed to the best of the world. And I'm going to ask you one question. How many of you who came to Oxford or went wherever you went to study on government scholarship have given back? Very interesting question. I'm not talking about giving back by going back. Being a citizen right now is very free. But what contribution are we given? When, we have the saying that where 2 or 3 Nigerians are gathered, they will discuss the problems of Nigeria. The question, I'm sure it's the same thing for Africans. When 2 or 3 Africans are gathered, you discuss the problem. But what have you given back? And I think that leadership is not only about position. Unfortunately, because we've become really crazy about positional leadership, we kind of defer to people who are in positions of power, even if they're not really leaders. And I think we need to begin to ask questions. What area do I own? As far as I'm concerned, I'm a technology person. And it should be a shame for me to continue to live my life as I want without giving input in the ICT space on the continent. And of course, the final point is that, we've talked about, you talked about capitalism and how we need to move away from that. And I'm thinking that as a generation, and I'm glad you talked about Steve Jobs. We've got great examples in creating wealth and all that. And I think that it's great to create wealth. I also think that it's really great, to do stuff and be recognized and be rewarded for it. But one of the questions that we probably need to ask a lot more is in terms of legacy. And I think this speaks to the issue of transactional and transformational leadership. It is really difficult, and I think it's complex, actually not really difficult, to talk about transformational leadership because we have a transactional environment. One of the reasons why the leaders that we try to call to question, and I'll give an example of Nigeria again. We all talk, we complain, and when those people get into power, we're the first people to send them a proposal because we need to complete a transaction. When you send that to them, there's nothing wrong with doing business. But if the focus is on what I can get, then there will be a problem with what others can get. But I think that there's something called enlightened self-interest. It's self-interest, but it's enlightened enough to understand that it's not about what I get alone, but what I get in terms of leaving a legacy and expanding the perimeter of opportunity.
Thank you, Gbenga. I will open up the questions to the audience, but first I want to hear from Mary, who perhaps has what we might call an outsider's view, not being indigenous to Africa, but having worked many years in the continent. Can you just tell us what your views are, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought that as a BBC journalist, I am supposed to be balanced. So I thought that what I do, just very briefly, is talk about one country where the youth are very involved in politics, both from a negative and a positive perspective. And I'm going to talk about Somalia, where I think that the youth have already changed politics, both for the good and for the bad. And I'll start with the negative side, which I think has lots of parallels in other places like Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria now, where the young are used by those in power as machines of violence. And I think in Nigeria maybe Boko Haram is beginning to do this in the same way that Al-Shabaab, the militant group in Somalia, does. And it's interesting that Al-Shabaab actually means the youth in Arabic. And I'm just going to read you a very short excerpt from the book I've written about Somalia that talks about how the youth are used for politics and for violence by Al-Shabaab. So here's the reading. Al-Shabaab focuses a lot of its attention on indoctrinating the young. It preaches violent jihad to children at school and employs other more bizarre and macabre techniques to introduce them to violence and to encourage them to use it. One is closing schools and ordering the youth to attend executions of alleged spies and adulterers. In the town of Kismayo, Al-Shabaab organised a quiz for youngsters in the town. Most of the questions related to the Islamic faith. Hundreds of people attended the prize-giving ceremony for the winners, and this is how the organiser of the competition described the prizes. The winner gets an AK-47 rifle, a brand new one, plus 2 hand grenades, an anti-tank mine, and some office equipment, including a computer. Second prize is a second-hand AK-47 and some office supplies. Never in my life have I seen such rewards. The prizes were then passed around to spectators, with Al-Shabaab militants encouraging parents to let their children handle the weapons, saying this would help them learn how to fight the enemy. Another disturbing technique is the distribution of DVDs of Bollywood movies among those young people training for suicide missions. Impressionable teenagers have been told that these are films of paradise, shot by Al-Shabaab militants who are already living in heaven and experiencing all its delights after blowing themselves up in suicide attacks. I met a boy who had escaped forced recruitment by Al-Shabaab. His name was Muhammad, and he said he was 15 years old. I fled my hometown of Baidoa because Al-Shabaab fighters there force young people to join them. Boys in my town have only 2 options: to join Al-Shabaab or to flee the areas it controls. The Islamists punish young people who resist them. They slap, beat and arrest them, forcing them to join the militia. Many of my classmates have been forced to join Al-Shabaab. They're already fighting for them. So that was just to give a picture of how youth can be used or voluntarily present themselves as a political force in Africa. But I think it's interesting that while there's that side that is negative, I've also seen, perhaps more than any other group of young people that I've ever come across, that the youth in Somalia also offer the only political hope. I've been present at lots of political meetings when all the older people, they're just talking about, they're stuck in the same narrative and the same, they can only see things through the perspective of conflict. And the young are the only people that ever use words like reconciliation or talk about interests beyond their own. And so I'll just end by saying that in Somalia, and perhaps this would apply to lots of other places, they're having a political transition in August where 30% of parliamentary seats will be reserved for women. And I feel that maybe a way forward for getting the country that is so broken, for getting it back together would be if they reserved a similar number of seats for younger people, perhaps under the age of 35. Just because in all my experience in covering different African countries, it's the young people that they see things in a different way, and it's just a shame that they're so often used by politicians rather than being allowed to actually have a voice that is transformed into actual reality on the ground.
Thank you, Mary. So, Gbenga, you talked about the practical steps or the lack of kind of practical steps or that are available. I mean, what would you like to see yourself? I know you don't like to be referred to as a youth leader, but what would you like to see yourself, as someone who's sharing a stage with a sitting politician? What would you like to see? And,
Okay, clearly, I'm not one on a political path. I don't think I'm going to. I have said to all my friends, I'm never going to seek elective office, and they've said, things like, don't say it. Maybe you will. But one of the things that I would like us to have conversations around is, I think because we've got a leadership, let me not even say leadership, sort of a political deficit on the continent, there seems to be a lot of attention on saying that every good person should go into politics. I think we need to develop every area. We've got economy, we've got different sectors and all that. So one of the things I would like to see is that a new generation of young people who begin to prepare, and when I say young, I'm thinking 13. Because if they don't start at 13, there's no way they're going to master the art at 30. I'm not thinking, 35. It's too late already. Now, I'm thinking of a new generation that can deliberately begin to think of leadership, including political leadership, from now. And I'm thinking of them meeting with people who are deputy prime ministers and listening to the stories of how exactly to do things. Because unfortunately, and I think someone made this point earlier, that, it was Farakuka, that a lot of the presidents we've had, in Nigeria, and maybe in many other countries, they just found themselves there. One of the most celebrated Nigerian presidents to date is a man who a few months before the election said, I would never become president. I was asked to become president. So when they fail, there's a ready excuse. But just the same way people, build their careers, people start planning. If you want to be a medical doctor, you have to study this and this and this. We need to begin to have people who think the same way. I want to lead a country. What are the things I need to do when I lead a country? What are the things I need to learn? Those are the kind of conversations I'm hoping that we can begin to have right now. Working towards leadership deliberately, not because I, by chance, happen to be the member of a party or I've been, there's some form of tokenism where I didn't win, but I've been given something.
Thank you. So I'd like to put a question to Arthur about, you're in government right now, and a lot of the people in your parliament. What kind of steps is your government taking to groom and to kind of bring up the next generation of young leaders, or to kind of bring up that change that to make youth take a step?
The starting point, Africans must be very structured. You have a topic here which says, can the youth change politics in Africa? We must address that topic.
Yeah.
And my answer is yes, but it can't be business as usual. Because as she explains, young people have been involved negatively in this corruption, and these young people are involved. Young people, number one, must decide. No one's going to invite you. No one's going to groom you. Take a plunge. I was working at McKinsey, I was working at NASA building rockets. I took a plunge, a costly plunge, to become a political player. As your examples, give up all the glamour and glory and the glitz and go into the ground. You might even lose your life too in the process. But it is worthwhile because you get an opportunity to lead. I'm a deputy prime minister working with Mugabe, who's 88. He's double my age. But I wasn't groomed to do that. I made a decision, a costly one, to sacrifice personal comfort. That's why I'm saying leadership is a decision. What we need to do is then to give them positions of influence. We have young people in our parliament, young people in government. But again, if young people are having the same frameworks as the old Madalas, there will be no difference. So the things I put out there are the things that when you become a senator, when you become a mayor, when you become a councillor, when you become a president, you must have a dashboard in your office that measures performance of the country. So we must do two things. We need both theory and we also need practice. Because without theory, you're going to continue doing the old things that do not. So in Zimbabwe, what we're trying to do is to encourage young people to run for parliament and then give them the resources. As parties, choose young people, choose women to be candidates. Choose young women to be candidates and support them when they're candidates. Once they win and they're in parliament, make them ministers, make them governors, make them, when I say make, you make a decision to appoint a cabinet. Okay. You choose a young person. We have a minister of ICT who is 33. He's our youngest minister. And he is doing very well because he understands Steve Jobs. He understands Gates. Now if you have a young person who's 25, who is not reading, who is not clear about ICT, they will be no different from an 88-year-old. Okay. So don't glamorize youth. What do you know? You're 22, yes you are young, but that's not virtue. Are you skilled? Do you have values? Can you self-select? Can you sacrifice? So yes to young people as a constituency, but the young people must have different values than the values that have destroyed Africa. So we've tried our best in Africa, in Zimbabwe, but it is not easy.
Okay. We'll answer these first round of questions. Mary, would you like to take one of them?
I thought the last question was really interesting because I have noticed it's not just Botswana, but some other African countries where you have a political system that works better is where there's a hybrid, where they're not forced just to follow the Western model, but they take what works from that. I'm thinking about actually like in the Somali territory, Somaliland, which is the only stable part, has also got a system where they use traditional elders as well as the Western democratic model, and it seems to work really, really well. But at the same time, that does rely on maybe African traditions where respect is given to elders, and I think that that is a really big problem that I've noticed in lots of my coverage of African countries, is that there's still this kind of, I like it, I think it's good that elders are respected and deferred to, but I think it makes it even more difficult for youth to be given a voice. So I don't think that that is the best model. There has to be a third way that somehow includes the best of the traditional, the best of Western democratic systems, but also finds a way of slotting in young people, but not just as tokens, otherwise they'll always be seen as Team B.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to address some of those questions?
Very quickly, the issue about is, tell you this, I gave up a salary of $150,000 at McKinsey to take a salary of $500. $150,000 versus $500 a month. Now, you have your wife and you have your family, that's a major problem. But to do that, that's not easy. Once you get in, because you're a superstar, you're a baller, you create enemies. Even the people who are supposed to embrace you will fight you. Some young people too, who will get intimidated because you're coming from Harvard, you're coming from Oxford. But you've got to keep working. Your ideas are taken with skepticism. You have to demonstrate that they work. And you have to be elected. Elections are not about ability. We had an example from Ghana, from Nigeria, that out of the 14 leaders, only 1 or 2 have a graduate university degree. So when you go for elections, they don't vote for PhDs. They vote for other things. So it's not easy. But it's fulfilling in the sense that you feel you are making a difference, you're making a dent in the universe. So I'm not unhappy. I'm happy, I'm content because I'm making a difference. Team B, I was in Ghana 2 days ago. I met up with the vice president. He's very young, and I think he's doing a good job. I think psychologically, as a people, we must also accept young people as leaders. Why have we accepted young people as CEOs of major companies? 22, 23, Zuckerberg, billionaire, multi-billionaire. Psychologically, we've accepted young people as business leaders, but psychologically, we still have a problem when it comes to politics. So we, as a people, must also start accepting that a young person can be a better leader. Secondly, don't just appoint them because they're young. Are they knowledgeable? Don't appoint people who are content free and say, I'm a young person who's 30 and yet they have no value addition. So I'm not quite sure about the Ghana example, whether they call them Team B because they're young or they call them Team B because they can't deliver. But we must psychologically prepare to accept young people as players. Last one, very briefly. The problem with Africans is we borrow everything lock, stock, and barrel. We worship dogma, human rights, democracy. We have our own values. Why don't we learn from America? Learn from Western Europe. Learn from China. Learn from Singapore. Borrow what we think works. Reject what we don't want. But more importantly, learn from ourselves. We have our own history of governance. We have our own values. Ubuntu is not here in England. Ubuntu is not there in America. The extended family notion. I am because we are because I am. That is something we own as Africans. Let us find ways of leveraging African wisdom into our models. At the end of the day, we must have a Zambian economic model, Zambian political model, which is different from the one in Ghana.
Thank you, Minister. Do you have anything to say? Okay, I'll just open up another round. Lady in the blue, over there. Question.
My name is Pat, and I'd like to thank you for your talk and it's inspirational. Thanks, Mary, for your book.
Question, please. Sorry, we're running out of time.
As a deputy of Zimbabwe, Mary talked about the issue of Somalia. But for the last 20 years, there's been a lot of problems that's happening in the part of Africa. And specifically, as a Zimbabwean, what kind of action do you take to try to issue that in Somalia? For example, in February, there was a conference here that was being done. But in terms of the ways you can talk about all the time, but I think in Africa, unless the leaders acknowledge and understand that they're failing the continent, I don't think they will never get a solution. I don't think the youth that we talk about to get them into the politics and the leadership will never ever happen unless the leadership of today try and admit and understand. For example, how many leaders can you think of your head that have been in power so many years? So what chance would the youth today have to become the leaders of tomorrow?
Thank you. One last question. Lady over there on the end, yeah.
The last time I went to Africa, there was a big change from the time before, and I did see a lot of it was about IT, it was about mobile phones and all that. And there was a rumor that the World Bank was really heavily investing in IT in sub-Saharan Africa. Have they followed through with that? Have they done that? To really put their money in the numbers?
Okay, thank you. Gbenga, I'm going to pass on that question to you, and then we'll address that.
I didn't hear the rumor about the World Bank investment, but there's a World Bank rep here, so she can talk about that. But yes, there's been a major shift in terms of technology use and application on the continent. And I think that three things speak to that. Number one is something what happened in January in Nigeria, and it was building. It's not just Occupy Nigeria just happened because people were using social media. It's because before now, there's been a lot of frustration and energy that needed to go out. But don't forget, before now, the only way we could get the news was if it happened yesterday, you read in the newspapers today. So it's old news. But right now, you've got tools, you've got technology tools that make the information available to you. One of the major reasons why people went out on the streets in January in Nigeria is because before now, people had, yes, government spent a lot of money on budgets for the presidency and all of that. But clearly, using social media, people were able to give out the message to say that the presidency's budget for meals was about 1 million naira per meal, basically. And so everybody knew exactly what they were doing. That's one in terms of using technology to allow social media, coming face to face with people going on the streets. Second is in terms of content creation. So we were known, of course, as a continent where you will dump your product and things will be bought. So it was just a market. But we're beginning to see a lot of activity amongst young people of not just creating local content, but using technology to create business models and businesses that take advantage of technology. Because otherwise, let's not forget, at least there are 2 countries on the continent that have 24.9% official numbers of unemployment. And so technology is one other opportunity. And the other is the fact that now, because of the connectedness of the world, everybody can get access to information of what's happening. And of course, all that, again, is thanks to technology. So yes, things have definitely changed in that area. Of course, not the best so far.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to take the question about the lady who wants to go back?
The diaspora, the African diaspora, 2 strategies. We do not believe that all the people in the diaspora must come back home. It actually would be a mistake to do that. We just need a critical mass. A few people should come in who are well skilled, who are prepared to sacrifice, so that they are running companies in Africa, they're running governments in Africa. A few of you must come and do that. A critical mass must do that. The rest of you must stay at the World Bank. The rest of you must stay at the IMF, at Harvard, at McKinsey, in Silicon Valley, and become our ambassadors. Get us investment, get us ideas, get us contacts. That's what the Jews are doing. That's what the Chinese are doing. That's what the Indians are doing. So we want you to stay here. Is our money in the bank. But a few must take a plunge and be in the continent and do the right thing. But we want you to be everywhere. Under globalization, you can't have the citizens of a country inside one country. Part 2, we as governments must also play our role. There should be no taxation without representation. Meaning, we must also address the needs of the diaspora. Multiple citizenship must be allowed so that people can make moves and do things. We must allow the diaspora to vote. So whatever grievances and issues you have, we as the people who are on the ground in Africa, we must address them. Somalia, we address Somalia through SADC. We address Somalia through the AU. And by the way, what I want to emphasize is, if Zimbabwe is not doing well, South Africa can be successful. So the problems in Zimbabwe must be understood as the regional problems. The problems in Somalia must be Ghana's problems, must be Nigeria's problem, which means ECOWAS and Maghreb must ensure that we come up with a resolution in Somalia, because that region won't be successful. Take it to the next level. The entirety of the African continent will not be successful unless and until Somalia has resolved its matters. Mali is doing well, Guinea-Bissau, Sudan, and so on and so forth. So as Africans, please take a vested interest approach to every conflict, to every problem we have in Africa. The World Bank, I'm glad if they're doing that, but let's not wait for the World Bank. We as governments, we as Africans, let us make sure we take advantage of the ICT revolution. I gave you the numbers that potentially ICT will affect every industry. It will give us half our GDP. But what's beautiful about ICT, you just need a good brain and a computer.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to give the last word here to Mary, so thank you.
Yeah, a lot's been said about ICT in Africa, and I read just on the way up here that Africa, after Asia, has got the highest saturation of mobile phones in the world. And one thing that we ask a lot of the BBC, and we don't have the answer to, is why has there been no African Spring? Does that mean that the Arab Spring was led by the youth and their knowledge of all the social media? And does that mean that African youth are happy with what they've got? That's just a question that I thought I'd leave you with.
I think it has to be answered. We don't need African Spring. This is the problem now. Why should the Europeans and the Americans tell us we need African Spring? We have our own ways of bringing our own revolution. Anyway, I don't think we should be prescriptive.
Okay, so we don't need an African Spring, but we need Africa to work. And I think what she was referring to wasn't exactly the name, but in terms of the spirit of young Africans and Africans taking their countries back. Not how. Yes.
Egypt is an African country.
Exactly. Tunisia.
Morocco is an African country. Tunisia
Okay, guys, we can't all kind of chip in like that, please. So I'm just going to close this session and thank our distinguished guests and say thank you very much because this has been a very interesting discussion. Thank you to the audience.